Breaking tonight as Pittsburgh grieves for the victims of yesterday's horrific synagogue shooting, as families in Jeffersontown, Kentucky grieve after an attempted, seemingly racially motivated church shooting on Wednesday left 2 people dead, and as law enforcement starts building the case against the domestic terrorists who sent those threatening packages in the mail, a new national debate on the state of our politics opens up, with the establishment coming together in a spirit of unity on one point: it's all Donald Trump's fault. Tonight, we'll debate every angle of this with our special guests, Governor Sarah Palin, Anthony Scaramucci, and Lisa Booth. They'll all be here with me for the hour. Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. Not a particularly positive week in America. Before we get to our guests, I want to go straight now to Ron Dermer, Israeli ambassador to the United States. He's in Pittsburgh right now. Ambassador, I really appreciate you being there for us tonight. I just want to offer right away my condolences. My condolences. I know that it's not just about those individual people and families who have been directly affected by what's happened. Every Jewish person, to some degree, will be feeling an element of pain and fear as a result of what's happened. I would just like to start by asking you for your general thoughts on what we've seen.
Well, it's the worst anti-Semitic attack in American history, and Israel's the one and only Jewish state, and today the people of Israel mourn with the people of Pittsburgh, not just the Jewish community, but the wider community. I attended an event tonight that brought faith leaders, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and they came together really to say no to this type of hatred that unfortunately claimed 11 lives.
So, Ambassador, you mentioned they're coming together, and that's wonderful to see. Unfortunately, even today, we didn't see that happening across the board, and we immediately had people out saying that President Trump is in some way responsible for what happened. What's your reaction to that claim, specifically about President Trump?
Well, first reaction is people should study history. Anti-Semitism did not begin in 2016. It's been going on for many centuries, about 25 centuries. And President Trump is not responsible for the anti-Semitism that has existed really in the United States in an increased fashion over the last couple of decades. You know, in 2014 and 2015, and I say that only because that was before President Trump came into office, over half of the hate crimes against religious groups were hate crimes against Jews. A lot of people don't know that. And I think you have had an increase in hate in recent years. I think that's a product mainly of the rise of social media, where you have a lot of these purveyors of hate that can now go and reach out to other purveyors of hate and spread their poison. I have to tell you something else, Steve. I've been following anti-Semitism and leaders' statements against anti-Semitism for 20, 25 years. I have never heard a statement the likes of which I heard yesterday from President Trump, where he said those who are trying to destroy the Jewish people, we will destroy them. Not only did I hear that statement, Steve, I heard it applauded by all of Trump's supporters at that rally. Now, that should tell people that this is the action of the extremes. It could be neo-Nazis on the right. It could be militant Islamists on the left. It could be all sorts of people in between. Anti-Semitism is not a product of one side of the political spectrum. It has not been thus throughout history. You know, in Europe, there are waves of anti-Semitism that have been going on now for many, many years. There have been attacks on Jews in Paris, in Brussels, and in other places around the world. And I think to pin this all at the foot of President Trump is wrong. I very much appreciate, and the Prime Minister of Israel appreciated very much his strong condemnation of anti-Semitism yesterday. And I think what has to happen is people across the political spectrum should stand together against this hate, and they shouldn't just call out anti-Semites on the other side of the political aisle. They have to call out anti-Semites on their own side of the political aisle.
Ambassador, I really appreciate that, and frankly, I really appreciate what you specifically said about the Trump supporters, because that point isn't often made, and often they are lumped in. You know, the president can take care of himself, as we know very well, but it's the denigration of his supporters that I really can't stand, and so I really appreciate you making that point tonight. Well, Ambassador Dermer, thank you so much for joining us.
Just play the tape, and you will see those people in that Trump rally applaud when the president said he was going to take on all of these anti-Semites. And I think that's very important, and we appreciate very much what he said. And not just him, Steve, there are people, Republicans and Democrats alike, that have come out very forcefully against that. And that is very, very important, to say no to this anti-Semitism and to make all these anti-Semites, whether they're on the left or the right, know that they will have no sanction anywhere for their activities here in America.
Well, greatly appreciate those words. And once again, please pass on our condolences to the community there. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring in our guests for the hour. Former vice presidential candidate and Alaska governor, Sarah Palin. Former White House communications director and author of the brand new book, Trump, the Blue Collar President, Anthony Scaramucci. And from New York, Fox News contributor, Lisa Booth. Lisa, hi, nice to see you. I'm going to start with you to make you feel welcome, bring you in there. You're not around the table, you're over in New York. I know. Well, we'll see you next week in New York. I'll have something on that a bit later in the show. But I just wanted to get your general reactions. Again, it's been a really, really tough week in America, not just with the shooting, but obviously with those threatened packages, the other shooting. It's just been a tough week. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think it's absolutely heartbreaking, and particularly the synagogue shooting. I just think it takes a specific kind of evil to attack and to try to kill people, to actually kill people in a place of worship. A house of worship is supposed to be a refuge from the rest of the world, and so I think it just takes a special kind of person. This man is facing a federal hate crime investigation. It is said that before he shot these poor people, he said all Jews must die. And I believe what the ambassador said, of anyone that traffics in anti-Semitism and this hate must be universally condemned, whether it's the David Dukes of the world or the Louis Farrakhan's. They have to be condemned. There is no place in society, there's no place in America for that kind of hatred. And so my heart breaks for those families who lost loved ones, and just praying for them, and as we all should.
I think that's right. We all feel like that, Governor.
Absolutely. And, so appalling, so unacceptable what we have seen in this last week. And, so much of that hate that is targeted towards our Jewish community it's based on fear and envy, because the enemies can't handle the fact that Israel is so successful, independent, resilient, and, that's the enemy's problem, that they just can't handle it. So the rest of us, and there are more of us than there are of them, we had better stand up and stand strong in unity on behalf of our Jewish community and our friends in Israel, and not put up with what we have just seen.
I completely agree, and that's, by the way, that's another reason why I find this, this association of any of this with President Trump just ridiculous, because he would totally share those sentiments. I mean, incredibly strong supporter of not just Israel from a policy point of view, but personally. Anyway, and
well, I mean, there's so many things about the governor that I love in terms of her policy and her forward thinking, and a lot of my book is based on stuff that the governor was talking about 10 years ago.
Yes.
But what I've heard her speak about Israel, I echo her comments about the protection of Israel as a symbol of individual liberty in the world. Because at the end of the day, if you believe in Western values and you believe in the Western civilization, it's a responsible agent of the government that has to protect the minority and has to protect the most vulnerable minorities. And so I thought the speech yesterday was fantastic. I had an opportunity to talk to the president this morning, and he said, hey, I gave this speech. Do you think the mainstream media will give me credit for the speech, or will they play the speech out there? And of course they didn't. And so I applaud you tonight and the ambassador for really telling it like it is. The president is a strident protector of the state of Israel and a strident protector of individual liberty and the Jewish people. And so we have to stand up and have to speak very loudly.
Yes. Well, by the way, I do appreciate you take this show seriously enough, Anthony, that you get proper training from a master communicator before you come on and get briefed by the president.
Well, let me tell you something. Some of those briefings have been nasty, where he's yelling at me, telling me I'm not doing the right thing on TV. He's the best media coach in civilization.
Right. We'll get to some of that later. Look, as we've touched on earlier, the politics is here. It's been there right from the beginning. Ever since this sequence of events was happening last week with the packages and the shooting and so on. The president just out with a tweet, actually, engaging in some of that. He's laying blame, as he often does, on the fake news media and so on. But he's responding to something that started like, within hours of this shooting taking place. I couldn't quite believe. Watch what Tom Steyer said this morning about all this.
His response to the tragedy was appropriate, but there's something much bigger than that going on here, which is the atmosphere that he's created and that the Republican Party has created in terms of political violence. And I think if you look across the political scene, what you see is routine, systematic lawlessness, an attempt to break small d democratic norms in pursuit of victory at all costs.
It's just unbelievable. He's talking about the president promoting political violence. Let's just look and remind ourselves, by the way, at some Democratic politicians and what they've said in this area. Let's have a look.
You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
Please don't just come here today and then go home. Go to the Hill today. Get up and please get up in the face of some Congress people.
And then, that's the politicians. And then you've got their supporters, the kind of cultural leaders, if you like, of the Democratic Party. And again, what have they been saying in the general category of political violence? Let's have a look at that.
Of course I want to punch him in the face.
Right. Yes! I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
And then on top of that, I mean, we just go on and on. You've got Kathy Griffin with that Shakespeare in the Park play where they're acting out the stabbing of President Trump. The New York Times just this week with some short story thing about assassinating President Trump. I mean, just on and on it goes. Snoop Dogg, great example. I mean, horrific example, but just on and on it goes. I mean, and they're the ones that are saying that the president is to blame for this culture.
Right. Well, thank the Lord, Americans have awakened to that hypocrisy, to the double standards that are spewed by so much of the mainstream media, so much of the left. I remember the first time that I heard publicly President Obama proclaim that you were to bring a gun to a knife fight. President Obama saying he couldn't wait to get out there and kick somebody's ASS because they screwed up on an infrastructure project. I remember him with such insensitivity mocking children with special needs on late night TV. Where was the outcry during any of that? Did you see conservatives freak out and go out and vandalize communities and protest what was going on? And no, we wanted to civilly change that discourse.
Yes.
Maturely, professionally, diplomatically change the debate in the country. We don't see any of that civility going on now on the other
and she
side.
says, Hillary Clinton, you can't be civil. And Lisa, I mean, it's not just the words, it's the actions. I mean, we've seen, threatening packages sent to your point, to the governor's point, Don Jr. and his family, Susan Collins after the Kavanaugh vote, of course Steve Scalise, but none of that led to accusations that the Democrats are responsible for this culture of violence.
No, and we were told by the media, particularly after the Steve Scalise shooting, that there needs to be unity, and it was hardly mentioned at the fact that the shooter was a Democrat. But look, looking specifically at the synagogue shooting, I think people forget and often don't talk about the fact that President Trump's daughter is Jewish. His son-in-law is Jewish. His grandchildren are Jewish. I think he has a special place in his heart for the Jewish community, and you see that in his policies, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, being the first sitting president to visit the Western Wall. You also look, it's been reported that the shooter actually didn't like President Trump because he felt that he wasn't an anti-Semite. So all of this gets lost in the media when they have a narrative that they're trying to drive, and that narrative is always anti-Trump. I mean, that's the only thing that's been consistent about their reporting, is that it is all negative towards the president.
Yeah, it really is. Look, we've got to squeeze in a break, so we'll keep the discussion going straight back to you when we come out. Please don't go away. Predictably, the establishment is blaming President Trump and his supporters for a climate of rage and hate. But let's be honest, A lot of Americans have had a lot to be angry about for an awful long time. I'm thinking in particular of African Americans, whose long struggle for freedom may have been won decades ago, but whose struggle for genuine equality and opportunity and dignity and fairness is a long way from over, a very long way. I'm also thinking of working Americans, especially those outside the booming centres of the modern knowledge economy, whose economic security has collapsed, whose economic opportunities have disappeared, and whose social fabric, especially family and community, has been ripped apart. That's been going on since at least the early 1970s. That's nearly half a century. This anger we're seeing, it didn't start with Donald Trump. I think it goes back at least a decade. In 2008, you saw the elite bail themselves out while working people paid the price for their recklessness and incompetence. And you saw a new tone enter our politics. Before then, we had presidents who, whatever their political views, made clear they loved America and loved Americans. All Americans. Reagan, the Bushes, Bill Clinton, they weren't haters. You got the sense they loved everybody. Bill Clinton, perhaps a bit too much. But then we saw something new. A cultural elitism came in, condescension, even contempt, like this.
They get better. They cling to guns or religion.
And this.
For the first time in my adult lifetime, I'm really proud of my country.
We saw hate and divisiveness from the top. And remember, from the left, not the right, from the elitists, not the populists, from Joe Biden.
They, not you, have an ally in the White House. This time, they have an ally. They're a small percentage of the American people, virulent people. Some of them the dregs of society.
And of course, from the queen of hate, the empress of divisiveness.
You could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
I have never heard Republicans talk about fellow Americans like that. President Trump has never talked about fellow Americans like that. Yes, he's used harsh language about illegal immigrants or MS-13 gangs, too harsh at times, for sure. But he's never talked like that about the people of this country. Ever since 2008, working Americans have started to realize that the people at the top, the politicians and the CEOs and the tech geniuses and the Hollywood types, they really do look down their noses at them for how they live, what they eat, what they watch, the fact they go to church, and of course their political views. I know this is true because I'm part of the elite. I sit at their dinner tables and hear how they speak. So let's tell the truth about the roots of this rage. I want to say something directly to my friends in the elite. This is not just about Trump. It's about you, too. The way you've shown no compassion for the casualties of your ideas, the human casualties of globalization, automation, centralization, and uncontrolled immigration. Your ideas have destroyed people's jobs, devastated their families and communities. And then, in 2016, when they cry out for help, you call them deplorable. As Eric Holder would say, you kick them. The elites have enthusiastically jumped on a tweet from Tom Hanks today. He was in the Pittsburgh neighborhood where this terrible synagogue shooting took place, which happens to be the neighborhood that Mr. Rogers lived in. Tom Hanks just played him in a movie. Hanks saw this sign in a window. Love thy neighbor, no exceptions. Well, yes, and that applies to you in the elite, too. Here's my plea to the liberal elite and the never-Trump elite. Start practicing the tolerance that you preach. Show some empathy and respect for your fellow Americans. Love thy neighbor. Yes, even the ones who support President Trump and watch Fox News. Tell me what you think of that at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. Right, Anthony.
Well, I loved it. I mean, but everything you said is crystal clear and very true. But what you really have to understand that this has happened before in our society. You can go back to the 1900s and see the split that Teddy Roosevelt tried to close, and now President Trump is stuck with the same challenge. You know, in my cell phone, I have him listed as Ted Rose because you can't put Donald Trump in your cell phone, right? And because I feel that he is the person that's going to pivot the lower and middle class into rising living wages and rising standards. And you can just see what he did in the African American and Hispanic American unemployment in terms of cutting the slack there. And so for me, what you're saying is 100% true. I feel it all the time. I mean, and you can't look at your Twitter feed because the more effective you are, the more they come at you and the more they try to demonize you for your view.
That's right.
It's this condescension. I mean, look, it seems to me that, like, honestly, one of the first times I saw that so clearly, frankly, was in relation to you. The scorn that was heaped on you for articulating that blue-collar voice in 2008. It was something else.
And yet, you know, I'm a proud Joe Sixpack. I am just proud of my blue-collar roots and know that, you know, the work ethic that's been instilled in me and the people around me, that's what has built America and made America great. But, you know, we have to ask ourselves, are we getting better in that arena of intolerance and violence? And we're not getting any better. The only way that the paradigm will shift, the only way that we're going to get better is to realize that this is an age-old battle of good versus evil, light and truth versus darkness and lies. The darkness has to flee when the light is switched on. People are asking all over the country, well, where's that light? What is that light? Go back to our founders. Our founding fathers looked to the good book and said, our Judeo-Christian principles on which we will build our country, we're going to write out our charters of liberty based on those principles. We are going to instill within our Constitution those principles. We're going to dedicate to God this country. We have strayed so far from that. That is the light, and that's the truth. We need to get back to that. That's the only way people's hearts and minds are going to change. It's not going to be this rhetoric spewed on both sides, fighting and even tweeting it out amongst each other. It's deeper than that. It's bigger than that.
I think that's really true, the depth. Lisa, what's your take?
Well, I think the best thing to do is for people to stop trying to score political points when something terrible happens. There really does need to be universal condemnation when we see violence, particularly in the name of politics, as we saw after the mail bomber. Everyone universally condemned him. We should have seen that as well when we saw Republicans on the receiving end of death threats throughout the Kavanaugh hearings. There just needs to be universal condemnation when people are doing things bad and trafficking in violence or, you know, trying to hurt people. We should all just say that is wrong. But your comment about Hillary Clinton and her sort of disdain for Trump supporters, I found that interesting because her basket of deplorable comments sort of crystallized why voters in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania that hadn't gone Republican since Reagan went for him. You saw how she felt about tens of millions of people in this country. And so that's why President Trump resonated with those people, particularly when he had talked about the forgotten men and women. And these are people that were also forgotten under the Obama administration as well. And so you can clearly kind of see why people in those states went for President Trump.
Yeah, I mean, just a very quick last. We'll talk about the book in a second, but we really will. Don't worry.
No,
but I just wanted to, you know, this contempt for fellow Americans. You don't see that in the other direction. It seems to me. It feels like the top sneering at the working people, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that has a lot. You know, go back to our roots too. You know, our parents would have never put up with us being stinkers to our neighbors or to our classmates by bullying them and being intolerant. Anthony, we were just talking about, hey, do you have a problem when somebody has a differing opinion? Do you want to go beat the crap out of them and duke it out? No.
Good conservatives respect other people.
I know. That's exactly right.
The governor and I would like to take the battle into the intellectual marketplace of ideas and see if our ideas can win versus their ideas. And they want to silence us because they know that we may be able to convince people that what we're saying is true. Individual liberty, respect, self-determination, market forces, incentive-based market forces driving your success.
Well, in the nicest possible way, I want to silence you right now because we have to go. But we'll be back in a second. And again, I just want to leave this discussion with... Tom Hanks is absolutely right about that tweet. Love thy neighbour, no exceptions. But everyone needs to take that on board. OK, coming up, the populist revolution is above all a blue-collar revolution, as we've been discussing. It is a giant change in American politics, and we'll debate it next. Welcome back, everyone. Anthony Scaramucci here has a new book out called Trump, the Blue-Collar President. Now, I've actually read most of this book. I haven't got to the end. I really have read it, and I absolutely love it. I really want to recommend it to everyone. You've got to get this book. It's incredibly well written. It's clearly written by him, not by some anonymous, whoever it may be. It's very personal, and it's really, really interesting. One of the things that I found really fascinating was this kind of surprising connection between you and the president in construction, the construction business, an absolutely classic blue-collar business. And that's the world I grew up in too. My stepfather was a construction worker. I'd go on construction sites. My first job was a project manager on a construction site. There's something about that, isn't there, that just teaches you the basics.
Yeah, and you got to get up early, you got to get on time, you have to pull together in a team. And Fred Trump, I did a lot of research on the Trump family, and Fred Trump pushed Donald J. Trump to do those sorts of things. And I was talking to the president today about how they used to knock on doors to collect rent, and if there was a blue-collar worker in one of their apartment complexes that couldn't pay the rent that month, let's say they were laid off or something like that, the president and his dad were always cool about it. Like, okay, no problem, you're an honorable person, let's see if you can make the rent next month, and we'll wait. You don't hear those stories about the family. And the president, he's driving around in his big Cadillac at age 25, and he's taking coins out of laundry facilities and vending machines at his dad's place. And so it just brought him in touch with that common experience. And if you were on the campaign trail with the president, I did 26 campaign stops with him. He did about 170. You can say he genuinely loved these people, and they loved him back. And so, my Democratic friends are upset about all this stuff. A lot of that anger and that nastiness is coming from that. He stole their traditional base. They didn't even go to Wisconsin. You just have to think about the alacrity of that. You've got the Speaker of the House is from Wisconsin. There's a red guy by the name of Scott Walker in Wisconsin. But the consultancy said, no, you guys own that state. They're all blue-collar people. Don't have to go there. And so my book is about how he saw that when there were 17 or 18 different elites that frankly didn't.
Yes.
But I do also point out that Bernie Sanders saw it.
That's exactly right. And I make this point often on this show.
There were two candidates that actually saw it. But the president won out because America is a center-right country as it relates to business, and it relates to generating your own open economic incentives.
The populist left, have a very similar analysis, which I agree with about what's gone wrong. It's just that the solutions, I think, are wrong and end up being counterproductive. Now, Sarah, the thing, I don't want to embarrass you, but I think you were the real pioneer of this modern populism. And I just want to remind everyone, if you don't mind, of what there's done. Before we play this, just hang on a second. You may not know, I was literally there on the floor of the convention center in 2008. And that's the moment I thought, wow, this is really something. This is interesting and different. And it was the beginning, I think, of this populist moment. Let's have a look.
I've learned quickly these last few days that if you're not a member in good standing of the Washington elite, then some in the media consider a candidate unqualified for that reason alone. Here's a little news flash for those reporters and commentators. I'm not going to Washington to seek their good opinion. I guess a small-town mayor is sort of like a community organizer, except that you have actual responsibilities. I might add that in small towns, we don't quite know what to make of a candidate who lavishes praise on working people when they're listening, and then talks about how bitterly they cling to their religion and guns when those people aren't listening.
Incredibly powerful. The populist revolution, how do you think it's going?
Thankfully, it's caught steam. I mean, it barreled across the country in 2016, and it's so wonderful to have nothing to lose but to get out there and speak truth and speak candidly, and that's what I believe that our president is in that same boat. I'm convinced that it's men and women in Carhartts and steel-toed boots who built and are building this country, and unfortunately, it's men and women in the suits and ties that are tearing it down too often. So those people, the grassroots of this country, they have more common sense in their little finger than most of those politicians up on the Hill do. And we need to listen to them. But Anthony, maybe you can educate me on this. I have always believed that there is some kind of inherent disconnect, though, in the wealthy, in how they perceive things and how they're connected to practical things in our daily lives, compared to Joe Blow six-pack. Like, take the wealthy like Nancy Pelosi. please take Nancy. Nancy Pelosi. She's making decisions on our oil development opportunities in the country, right? And yet, does she understand the effects of her decisions on how it affects our pocketbooks? Because when was the last time she ever went and, you know, realized the price of gas, fueled up her own tank, you know? Probably. When was the last time she's gone into a grocery store and then made her family a meal that maybe she had to shoot first? When was the last time she has really understood what it is that they in the bubble are doing that affect our daily lives? And they're blessed with wealth, so they don't have to deal with a lot of the stuff, the struggle.
You're going to have to, I think the answer to that question is going to have to be buy Anthony's book, because it's all in there, how the president who's very wealthy can understand that.
But I do admit that on my path, my own financial independence, I started losing my ear. And it was the Trump
that's why the book is so great, because you reflect on that.
Back down to earth.
He reflects on that. It's really great. By the way, shooting your own meal, that reminds me of my great friend Joe Rogan, who's a big advocate of that. Never done it myself. Coming up, the real reason why the economy is booming under President Trump and why even the threat of a Democratic win in the midterms could spell disaster. Don't go away. All right, welcome back, everyone. I just want to talk about the economy and make a point that I'm not seeing discussed. It's so important, I think. We've got the midterms coming up. There's a real threat to this incredible economy we're seeing. The unemployment, the growth, the rise in incomes. That's because the reason we've had this amazing Trump economy is a surge in business confidence. It's not just the tax cuts or the regulation or anything like that. It's the fact that business knows you've got a pro-enterprise administration. And even the threat of the Democrats getting back in, even if they get the House but then can't do anything because they haven't got the Senate, even that would be a plunge in business confidence, and that would start to hurt the economy. And that's really important to understand. Right, Lisa, I think, is back with us. The Trump economy, what's your take on the threat that lies ahead if the midterms don't go the right way?
Well, I 100% agree with your points, but also think about it like this, too. Nothing is going to get done in Congress if Democrats take control of the House. There will be no policy passed. All we will see is investigation. So that's not good for the economy at all, to have the government literally at a standstill as a result of Dems taking back the House. Unfortunately, though, I don't think the economy plays as big of a role in the midterm elections in terms of driving voters out to the polls as it does during a presidential election. I think the economy will be the reason why President Trump is reelected in 2024, if the economy is still, or 2020, sorry, if the economy is still doing well. Yeah. 2020, I clarify that. 2020, if the economy is still going strong. No, if the economy, I'm tired, I'm sorry. If the economy is still going strong in 2020. So I don't think it plays as big of a role. It's actually more of these issues that kind of drive passion. You look at the left, the #1 issue for them is healthcare. You look at the right, the #1 issue is immigration. But, you know, the economy is going strong, and that would change if Republicans lose power.
Yes. Sarah, I think this confidence point. I mean, look, they can do a lot of damage without actually doing anything, just by being there.
Right. And wasn't that refreshing, though, to see that the psyche of the country became much more optimistic?
Yes,
I mean, happy warriors were able to get out there and get their message out there with this change that we saw in 2016, and consumer confidence, which so much is based upon the trajectory, started going up. And that will continue, as she's pointing out, too, though. If the GOP stays in control, just because of the time-tested truths that we believe in, the planks in our platform with free enterprise, with capitalism, and all those things that have proven to work versus the socialism that the left wants to usher in.
And so I mean, this point about confidence is crucial, isn't it? It's this fear that this pro-business climate just goes away.
Yeah, and he did two masterful things, the tax reform, and he delayered the regulation around Dodd-Frank. And so what that's done, Stephen, it's opened up the community banks to more lending in these small rural areas. And so the combination of those two things are really starting to kick in now. If you look at what economists look at, the tax cut usually takes about 12 to 18 months to really see its robust effect on an economy. And so you've got all that going on, plus the capital repatriation from overseas.
Because that's right, you've had an investment boom. That's the big thing that's happened.
You've had a capital investment boom, which should lead to a long-term positive growth trend. The magic wand that President Obama said, does President Trump have it? The magic wand is optimism delayering of the regulation and incentivizing businesses large and small to invest back in America.
And you,
it's great.
And you incentivize them by getting government out of the private sector.
Exactly.
They know that about him, and that's why they're so gung-ho.
So sorry. Coming up, the Mooch, he's right here. He's going to share some inside info on what's really going on in the Trump White House. Stay with us. Okay, Anthony Scaramucci was President Trump's communications director for only, I don't know, about only 11 days. 11 days, let's just be proud of it.
But 954,000 seconds. I mean, you can shape it that way, too.
So you know what's going on. And you've got a particular, I've noticed as you've been talking about this book, you've got a particular focus of your remarks on what's going on inside the White House, and that's Chief of Staff John Kelly.
Well, so the problem is, it comes up obviously because I made some remarks about him, because I'm obviously run reasonably successful businesses and know how to evaluate talent and put a team together. So people think my remarks about him are personal because he fired me, but if you read my book, you'll find out that that wasn't the first time I've been fired, and it probably won't be the last time that I'm going to be fired. I'm a little bit of a renegade, but as it relates to him, he's just, unfortunately, he's not suited to be the president's chief of staff. This president, that's just my opinion. Now, I applaud his service to the country, 40 years as a Marine. He's a 4-star general, and he's got an interesting skill set maybe for the Marine Corps. But he hasn't been able to recruit anybody inside the White House. And so that tells you something about his management style and his leadership style. You got to be able to recruit people. I put a team together from 0 to 65. The governor has been to our conferences. She sees how we run these things. It's collaboration, it's delegation, it's really not about me, and there's no need to create that level of insecurity and intimidation. So I think the president, that's me. I'm sure the president's mad at me for saying that because, he doesn't like that being exposed. But it's also healthy. I think the word sycophancy is much closer to selfishness and closer to self-preservation. The word honesty is way closer to loyalty, Stephen.
I agree with that.
I'd rather be honest about the situation. And by the way, I'm willing to debate anybody. I'm even willing to do mud wrestling, whatever it takes.
John Kelly? I don't want to see that. I don't think anyone wants to see that.
I think he could take me in a mud wrestle. I probably wouldn't want to mud wrestle him, but I'm saying...
Hang on, we're supposed to be against the culture of violence and all the rest of it.
Okay, I'm just I just want to say,
I agree about John Kelly. I think he's said some things that are really disloyal about the president, how he's kind of manipulating him on immigration and so on. I think he was totally incompetent over the border separations. I think that you can lay his... Anyway, look, let's go on about it. I think that one of the things that's really interesting is it seems to me the administration is doing better as the president has got more people around him who are like-minded and can sort of get where he's coming from on this populist agenda.
Loyalty, I think, is the greatest virtue. And you can't run a tight ship. You can't be successful and efficient and effective with disloyal people around you. Unfortunately, at that level of government, though, a lot of times people look at loyalty as a one-way street. Yeah. So those who work really hard to help propel somebody into a position and then they're forgotten about or, they're strewn aside, that they become disheartened. So, building that team, though, as everybody knows, in the private sector and in public service, too, and you can't succeed with
I agree. Sorry to cut you off, because I just want to quickly get Lisa in. Barely any time, but I think, Lisa, it applies to Congress, too. The president needs more people who share his populist agenda in Congress.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I think President Trump, he's the guy in the White House, so it's his policies that are supposed to be driving what the White House is doing every single day. But look, part of the reason why Washington, D.C. hates the president so much is he didn't kiss the ring. He's an outsider. He didn't bow down to the establishment. He didn't want their approval. The reason the media hates President Trump is he doesn't kowtow to them. He doesn't pander to them. They're so used to Republicans just taking the base of their question and answering it. President Trump challenges them, and they hate that. He can go on Twitter and get his message out. He doesn't need them, and he doesn't need the establishment, and that is why they hate him so much.
Good summary. Thank you so much, Lisa. All right, we're going to try and end the show on a positive note after a tough week. My message to both Democrats and Republicans, that's next. Don't go away. Whatever Congress looks like after the midterms, we can be sure of one thing. Neither party will be able to get anything done on their own. Even if the Republicans hold the House and win more Senate seats, they still won't have the 60 votes they need to get legislation passed without support from the other party. Same's true on the other side. So, to get things done, we'll need the parties to work together and compromise. You could call it the art of the deal. Politicians talk about unity, very nice. But the real test is whether they can actually work together. Can they make a deal? That's what positive populism is all about. Non-ideological, pragmatic policies that are pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community and pro-America. Can they make a deal? After the midterms, it's a question we'll be asking regularly on this show. Stay tuned. All right, that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you so much to Governor Palin, the Mooch and Lisa Booth. We have a special show for you next Sunday, a look at the midterms with a live studio audience. Lisa will be back for that. The Mooch will be back for that. Don't miss it. Mark Levin is up next. We have a Facebook Live, if you know what that is. Coming up right after this show. Join us next Sunday where the next revolution will be televised.